Thank you very much. It's fantastic to be here, and welcome to everyone who's joining this session. It's great to have this opportunity towards the end of the week to maybe step back from the many fantastic presentations and discussions there have been, and just take a very big picture view on cross-border investment into renewables. And we'll dig into that because so much of the investment that is happening is cross-border. My firm, Pottinger, has raised capital in recent years from the Americas and Asia for gigawatt scale projects in Australia. We've taken US VC investors into decarbonisation technology in Europe. We've helped European investors monetize their assets in other parts of the world. So we've really been living and breathing what's almost all been cross-border investment transactions along the whole capital stack, from early stage businesses through to much larger ones. And we've had a particular focus on how can we push back the frontiers of where capital can be invested in terms of types of projects, stage of business, and where around the world. There's been quite a bit of talk about the importance of inclusivity in the energy transition, and I think that's incredibly important. So what I'll do for the next 10 or 12 minutes is to talk about who's providing that capital, what are they looking for, where are they deploying it, and to some degree, why? What is the motivation? So whether you're a developer or utility scale investor or a startup with an important solution to one of the problems we're all trying to solve, or you're in government looking for ways to accelerate transition and bring additional capital to bear, there should be something for everybody as we go through here. A quick introduction to me, Nigel Lake. I'm based between New York, London, and Sydney. Originally from the UK, spent 12 years living in Australia, and have been involved with energy and infrastructure projects for more or less my whole career. Something like 35 years now, and that's every continent apart from Antarctica. And on a very hot New York day, perhaps some projects somewhere very cold might be quite appealing. I've advised, and we've advised on hundreds of billions of dollars of done deals, and also a lot that have not happened for one reason and another. And I think that's often where some of the good learnings come from. What is it that did or didn't get a deal done, and what insight does that give us into where are the best opportunities? Where are they going to come from in the next few years? Where are there better risk-return trade-offs, and how can we unlock them? So first, maybe just think about, why are we here? Most of all, for me, this is about low-cost energy. In many places, firmed solar PV and wind is cheaper than fossil fuels. Indeed, maybe as a bit of an aside, it's almost always been a question of where renewables are cheaper, not whether, because for 10, 20, 30 years, people have had wind turbines on their boats, and even the most ardent opponents of everything around renewables have probably got a solar panel on their boat or a little wind turbine there. It's also a bit of a question of when renewables are competitive. So of course, we'll touch on batteries and storage as we go through as well. We shouldn't forget that investment into renewables is also about energy efficiency. How do we get more energy out of the resources we're using? It's about electrification of transport, heavy trucks, electrification of industry, things like lime and cement, steel and aluminium. And those businesses also play a role in looking for sources of renewable power. Our team is involved in pretty much all of those things at the moment in a variety of different places. So this is, I hope, fresh perspective. The capital flows we're talking about are huge. We know we need, whether it's the analysis out of the Earth for All initiative or from some of the big consulting houses, several $1 trillion a year to be invested. Last year, the figure from Bloomberg New Energy Finance was about 1.75 trillion. And these sound like really big numbers. They're of the order of 2 or 3 or 4% of GDP. But keep in mind, $2 trillion is about what we spend on booze, and it's half what we spend on cars in the world. So the numbers are not perhaps as crazy as you might think. So one of the important points here, maybe the first big point I want to make, is it's not really a question for any investor of whether you should be investing in this. Any large investment manager will be thinking about what to invest in, where and when, because this is a huge opportunity. Secondly, maybe with a government hat on, I know various people have touched on this week, the right investment creates a lot of jobs, a lot of economic activity, a lot of employment opportunities. So getting that into the right places is important. And when you're thinking about cross-border investment, bringing forward projects which are designed to support the creation of local opportunity, not just good profits for investors, can help get projects across the line with government approvals, can help with community engagement. So what is capital being invested in? We started, the first big projects were in large wind projects in Europe and then large scale solar. And in Australia, one of the first projects we were involved with was this Gunnedah project, part of a portfolio of 1.3 gigawatts that we raised the capital for in, when was it? About 6 years ago. And so that's where we started. Now we're talking about really the entire value chain for investment, from very large scale renewables at one end all the way down to solar energy, to behind the meter projects, and then everything which goes with that, batteries, etc., investment in electric vehicle infrastructure. One of the things which is often mentioned in the world of solar, Australia, we've learned some really great lessons from, because it was one of the first countries to implement renewables at a high volume, despite significant government opposition at the time, is that, so in Australia now, you've got about 35% of the roofs have got solar panels on. Some people don't like what they look like. But here's an example of new products coming to market where it just looks like part of your roof. It's a shingle. And this, by the way, this is much more cost effective than the Tesla shingle, which is an available product right now. In terms of geography, again, there's been significant expansion. Still, a lot of the investment activity is concentrated in some places, e.g. across Europe, now starting to become much more significant in the US, with large wind project in New York and other things across the country. But that is continuing to expand. So we see projects from Eastern Europe and parts of Asia, and the boundaries are continuing to evolve. And that's perhaps the third big point here. Whilst that capital is still flowing more in some directions than others, there are good opportunities almost everywhere you look, and there are good business cases to go with that. Where is the capital coming from? And this is a really interesting thing. It's expanded quite dramatically. About 8 years ago, I gave a talk to the Long-Term Infrastructure Investors Association, their annual meeting in Germany. And you might imagine a lot of very earnest infrastructure folk were there. And my job was to try to keep people awake before lunch with the crazy notion that renewables would be an infrastructure asset class. And that's just 8 years ago. Now we have something like 300 mainstream investors on our list in the frame for any larger projects. These are funds that are deploying $100 million to $1 billion plus into individual projects. And that number, every time we reach out to take a new investment opportunity to market, that list just grows. So who are they? And they all have different needs. And this is where it starts to become really interesting when figuring out where and how you raise capital. One, obviously, specialist infrastructure investment managers. Secondly, the larger super funds, particularly from Australia and Canada, are starting to deploy money directly into platform businesses themselves. And as an example, we worked with Birdwood, an Australian company that is developing distributed solar energy and batteries, so kind of more community scale, 50, 100, couple of 100 megawatt type projects supported by batteries, and Aware Super, one of Australia's large pension funds, committed an initial $300 million to that business. This is Aussie dollars, so about 250 US. But the intention is for that number to be $2 billion, so about $1.5 billion US, which means 5 or 6 gigawatts of generation, something roughly of that order. So, and that's an individual bespoke transaction from one superannuation investment manager, because these large funds need ways to deploy money at scale and to deploy money continuously, i.e. to keep writing new checks. You have the sovereign wealth funds, particularly Middle East and Asia. You also have large-scale private equity funds like KKR and others that have developed their own platforms for deploying capital into the energy transition. Large energy companies, large end users of government programs. So it's a very diverse range. That said, every time a new project comes forward, there will only be a modest subset of that list for whom it's the right thing at the right time. That's quite hard to judge. So, moral of the story, and a shameless promotion for my team and everyone else that's doing good work as advisors in the renewable energy sector is, find a team that really understands how this is moving and that can help you navigate the changing interests and demands of investors. Geographically, it's clearly all over the place. For startups, I should touch on that as well, because there continues to be new technologies that are emerging that are important in battery storage and a range of other areas. Access to some of these businesses still remains quite challenging. I'm sure everyone knows this, but the last 18 months have been described by everyone I've talked to as the hardest time in 20 years for raising capital, if they've only been working 20 years. If they've been working 40 years, it's the hardest time they've seen in 40 years. And so that is a big issue, because some of these things are very important. And so it is for larger scale investors clearly very helpful to provide what support you can in terms of offtake or whatever to help bring some of these new things to market. Maybe the last thing I'll touch on before we then get into some questions would be, what is it that investors are really looking for? We see a lot of opportunities from large scale, mature, generating assets that would be worth billions of dollars to some much earlier stage projects that may involve a cutting edge technology, or maybe involve using existing technologies, but in a very different way, which makes it look like a first of a kind project. And those first of a kind projects are of course, really hard to get funded and to get airborne. There are all sorts of different investors out there with different mandates, different risk appetites, different geographic constraints, different factors driving their timing. And that continues to, their needs continue to evolve. So you have to stay really close to that. All of that said, I think there are some common themes that are incredibly important. And so if you're a developer building a pipeline of businesses, or you're contemplating how you can best package up a set of assets you've developed for sale, I think these are some of the big points. One, firstly, just well-developed, high-quality projects and good pipelines of further investment that come with them. People have talked about bragawatts and being able to talk about large numbers of gigawatts. What matters is getting those things built. And for me, that's why I was excited to show the picture of a project that we helped the developer raise the last bit of capital to get it ready to build. And then that's now a built project, as are the others in that portfolio. The practicalities of the projects are incredibly important. Every investor has got much more sophisticated in understanding the dynamics of grid connections and curtailment risk, the need for new transmission infrastructure or access onto the grid. And for some things, the quality of the resource. Now, is it a good solar resource or good wind resource? Easy to quantify, but still important. Merchant risk was once a thing. Maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was a lot more need for certainty of pricing. That pendulum continues to swing back and forward. Do people want more or less merchant risk? Where are they in terms of stage of project, scale of project, type of technology? It's endlessly people chasing around the circle of risk and return, and how can they best manage that? Do they want storage? Do they really understand whether the storage will generate value? Do they want just generation, etc.? Everybody has got a bit of an eye on political risk. But that said, economically, a very attractive economic cat is out of the political bag. So it's very difficult to push back on these projects, because in most places, they just make good economic sense. And last, and almost certainly most important in terms of what people are looking for, is good quality teams. No surprises, the people are incredibly important.